My name is Maya Chen, 29 years old, and I've always lived by one rule: never let anyone dictate your worth. 5 years ago, I walked away from a promising career at a prestigious law firm in Chicago to start my own boutique practice specializing in intellectual property law. Everyone thought I was crazy to leave the security of Morgan & Simmons, but I knew what I was worth, even if no one else did. I was always the rebellious one in my family. My older sister Eliza was the perfectionist, straight A's, perfect posture, married by 25 to a respectable man with a respectable job. Our parents beamed with pride at every holiday gathering, while I sat in the corner with my tattoos peeking out from under my sleeves and my cases that defended small artists against corporate giants. "When will you settle down like your sister?" Mom would ask, eyeing my purple-tipped hair with that familiar grimace of disappointment. "When hell freezes over," I'd reply with a sweet smile, helping myself to another glass of wine. Our family dynamic was predictable: Eliza the golden child, Maya the troublemaker. It wasn't that my parents didn't love me. They just didn't understand me. They couldn't fathom why anyone would choose freedom over security, passion over predictability. Then came James. My sister met him at some charity gala 2 years ago, tall, conventionally handsome, with that polished corporate veneer that my parents adored. He worked in investment banking, wore tailored suits, and spoke with the confident authority of someone who was used to being obeyed. They were engaged within 6 months. I first met James at a family dinner shortly after their engagement. He shook my hand firmly, his eyes calculating as they swept over my casual blazer and jeans. "So, you're the little rebel I've heard so much about," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "And you're the corporate drone my sisters decided to marry," I replied, matching his tone perfectly. Eliza shot me a warning look, but I just shrugged. Something about James set off alarm bells in my head, but I kept my concerns to myself. My sister seemed happy, and who was I to question her choices? The wedding was exactly what you'd expect: lavish, perfectly orchestrated, with not a petal out of place. I wore a bridesmaid dress that made me look like a purple potato and smiled until my face hurt. For Eliza, I could endure anything for one day. The first few months after the wedding were quiet. I buried myself in work, building my reputation case by case. My small firm was gaining traction, and I'd just won a significant case against a major tech company that had stolen a design from an independent creator. The settlement was substantial enough to make headlines in legal circles. That's when the calls from Eliza started changing. "Maya, we haven't seen you in ages," she said, her voice carrying that strange new formality that had crept in since her marriage. "James and I would love for you to come for dinner this Saturday." I agreed, ignoring the unease that rippled through me. I missed my sister, the real Eliza, not this carefully polished version that seemed to have emerged since the wedding. Their house was exactly what you'd expect: a sprawling Tudor in the suburbs, manicured lawn, expensive furniture arranged like a magazine spread. I brought a bottle of wine, which James examined with barely concealed disapproval before placing it aside. "We're more of a Scotch family now," he said smoothly, pouring me a glass I hadn't asked for. Dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. Between complimenting the quaint nature of my boutique practice and asking pointed questions about my dating situation, James made it clear that he found my lifestyle choices questionable at best. "You know," he said, swirling his scotch as we moved to the living room, "I have a colleague who's looking for good IP lawyers for his corporate team. The benefits are excellent: health insurance, 401k, stability." He emphasized the last word like it was a virtue I desperately needed. "My practice is doing quite well, thanks," I replied, keeping my tone light. "I just won the merit case." "Oh yes, I heard about that," James nodded. "Impressive for such a small operation." Eliza sat quietly, her eyes darting between us. There was something in her demeanor that bothered me, a hesitancy that hadn't been there before. As I was leaving, she hugged me tightly. "It's good to see you taking your career seriously," she whispered, as if reading from a script. "James says your win was significant." James says. I pulled back, studying her face. Since when do you need James to validate my accomplishments? She flinched slightly. That's not what I meant. But it was exactly what she meant, and we both knew it. The dinner invitations continued, each one feeling more like a performance than a family gathering. I noticed subtle changes in my sister, the way she looked to James before speaking, the careful monitoring of her food portions, the new designer clothes that seemed to erase any trace of her personality. Then came the infamous Thanksgiving dinner of 2022. Our parents were there, beaming with pride at their perfect daughter and her perfect husband in their perfect house. I arrived late due to a client emergency, wearing jeans and a nice blouse, perfectly appropriate, but not up to the new dress code that seemed to have been established without my knowledge. We were about to start without you, James said with a tight smile. Punctuality is a virtue, Maya. So is helping people who need it, I responded, kissing my mother's cheek. That's when I noticed Eliza's appearance. She'd lost weight, her cheekbones sharper than I remembered. Her hair was styled in a severe updo that aged her, and she wore a high-necked dress that seemed more appropriate for a corporate function than a family dinner. Throughout the meal, James dominated the conversation, directing topics and subtly cutting off anyone, particularly me, who veered from his preferred narrative. When I mentioned my latest case defending a small software developer, he smoothly pivoted. Speaking of careers, Maya, he said, placing his fork down precisely, I've been thinking about your situation. Your unconventional approach. My situation? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Your lifestyle choices, he clarified, as if I were a child needing correction. The instability of freelance work, your apartment in that questionable neighborhood, your lack of proper retirement planning. My parents nodded along, clearly having discussed this with him previously. James has a point, honey, my mother chimed in. We worry about you. You're almost 30, my father added. Maybe it's time to think more conventionally. I looked at Eliza, expecting her to defend me, but she stared at her plate, silent. Actually, James continued, leaning forward with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the authority, I've taken the liberty of scheduling a meeting for you with our financial advisor. And I spoke to Richard in HR at my firm. He's setting aside time next week to discuss potential positions that might be suitable for someone with your background. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone at the table was looking at me expectantly, as if James had just offered me salvation instead of the most condescending intervention I'd ever experienced. Let me get this straight, I said carefully, placing my napkin on the table. You've been discussing my career and finances behind my back, and you've taken it upon yourself to arrange interviews and financial consultations without my consent? James smiled indulgently. Sometimes those closest to a situation can't see the obvious solutions. We're family now, Maya. Family helps family. Family respects boundaries, I countered. And since when do you speak for my sister and my parents? Maya, Eliza whispered, a warning in her tone. No, I want to know, I insisted. When did everyone decide that James was the authority on my life choices? Don't be dramatic, James sighed. We're simply concerned. About what, exactly? My firm is thriving. I just secured office space in the Loop. I'm paying off my student loans ahead of schedule. What exactly about my life requires this level of intervention? It's not just about money, my father interjected. It's about stability, respectability. James has connections that could really help you. And what's the price for this help? I asked, looking directly at my sister. Do I need to change everything about myself too? Eliza's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with something, anger? Fear? That's enough, she said quietly. No, I don't think it is, I replied, standing up. I think we're just getting to the interesting part. The part where we discuss how James has appointed himself the arbiter of what's acceptable in this family. You're being ridiculous, James said dismissively. This is exactly the kind of emotional overreaction that concerns us. Us? I laughed. There is no us making decisions about my life, James. Not now, not ever. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, pausing only when my sister called my name. Maya, please, she said, that new hesitancy in her voice breaking my heart. He's just trying to help. I turned back slowly. Is he helping you too, Eliza? Is that why you barely speak unless he speaks first? Is that why you've lost 15 pounds since the wedding? Is that why you're wearing clothes that he approves of instead of the colors you love? James stood up abruptly. I think you should leave. Oh, I'm definitely leaving, I assured him. But Eliza, when you remember who you are, when you're ready to be my sister again instead of his echo, you know where to find me. The door slammed behind me with a finality that felt both terrifying and liberating. The next few weeks were quiet. No calls from my sister, tense conversations with my parents, and a conspicuous absence of family dinner invitations. I threw myself into work, expanding my practice, taking on cases that excited me. I hired an associate, then another. We moved into our new office space, and I bought myself a ridiculous leather chair that probably cost more than anything in James and Eliza's carefully curated living room. 3 months after the Thanksgiving disaster, my phone rang at 11:30 p.m. Eliza's name flashed on the screen. Maya, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. Can I come over? She arrived at my apartment 20 minutes later, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, clothes I hadn't seen her in since before the wedding. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare of makeup, revealing dark circles under her eyes. He monitors my spending, she said without preamble, sinking onto my couch. He checks my phone. He tells me what to wear, what to eat, who to talk to. He says it's because he wants what's best for me, but Maya. Her voice broke. I don't recognize myself anymore. I sat beside her, taking her hand. How long has this been happening? Since the honeymoon, she admitted. It started small, suggestions about my clothes, my friends. Then it was my job. Eliza had been a talented graphic designer before the wedding. He said it wasn't appropriate for his wife to work such long hours, that it reflected poorly on him. So I went part-time, then freelance, and now. Now what? I prompted gently. Now I'm not allowed to work at all. She looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and anger. He says he makes enough for both of us, that my job is to support his career, to be the perfect corporate wife. My blood boiled, but I kept my voice steady. What do you want to do? She took a deep breath. I want out. But Maya, he controls everything, our accounts, our house, even my car is in his name. And the prenup. She trailed off. The prenup that Dad insisted was so essential? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. She nodded miserably. If I leave without proving fault, I get nothing. I stood up, pacing the room. Then we prove fault. Emotional abuse is still abuse, Eliza. It's my word against his, she said quietly. And he's very careful to keep his control private. In public, he's the perfect husband. Everyone thinks I'm so lucky. I stopped pacing, a plan already forming. What if we could prove it? What if we could document the control, the isolation, the financial abuse? Hope flickered in her eyes for the first time. How? Do you trust me? I asked. She nodded without hesitation. More than anyone. Then here's what we're going to do. The plan was simple but effective. For the next 2 months, Eliza documented everything, screenshots of controlling texts, recordings of conversations, legal in our state with one-party consent, detailed notes of every instance of financial control. She collected bank statements showing how James had systematically removed her access to their joint accounts, emails where he criticized her choices and appearance, and testimony from the few friends she'd managed to stay in contact with who had witnessed his behavior. Meanwhile, I built a legal strategy. I consulted discreetly with colleagues who specialized in family law, gathering precedents and building a case that would not only free my sister from her marriage but ensure she received fair compensation for what she had endured. James, of course, noticed the change in Eliza. She was playing a dangerous game, pretending to be more compliant than ever while secretly building her escape plan. There were close calls, the time he came home early and nearly caught her photographing financial documents, the night he questioned why she'd been on the phone with me for longer than usual. "He's getting suspicious," she texted one afternoon. "He's installed some kind of tracking app on my phone." We switched to burner phones after that, communicating only when she could safely leave the house on approved errands. Then came the corporate gala, the event that would change everything. As the wife of a rising star at the firm, Eliza was expected to attend, to smile and charm and reflect well on her husband. It was the perfect opportunity. I had a client who worked for the same financial institution as James, a brilliant woman who had sought my help when her innovative trading algorithm was being claimed by a male colleague. We'd won her case spectacularly, and she owed me a favor. With her help, I secured an invitation to the gala as a guest of one of the partners. James's face when he saw me walk in was priceless, shock quickly masked by that practiced corporate smile. "Maya," he said smoothly, gripping Eliza's arm just a little too tightly. "What an unexpected surprise." "James," I nodded coolly. "I'm here with Stephen Harrington. We just wrapped up a case involving one of his portfolio companies." I watched the calculation in his eyes. Harrington was several levels above him in the corporate hierarchy. James couldn't cause a scene without risking his precious reputation. "How nice," he managed. "Eliza, darling, I think the Blakemores wanted to speak with us." "Actually," I interrupted, "Stephen specifically asked to meet Eliza. He's heard so much about her design work." James froze. "Her former design work, you mean?" "Eliza's focused on more important priorities now." "That's not what her website says," I replied innocently. "The new portfolio pieces are impressive." It was a calculated risk. Eliza had secretly begun taking freelance projects again, building a portfolio that could support her after she left. The confusion and then rage that crossed James's face told me he had no idea. "Website," he repeated, turning to Eliza. My sister straightened her shoulders, the fire I remembered finally returning to her eyes. "We can discuss this later, James," she said calmly. "Stephen Harrington is waiting." Throughout the evening, I watched James struggling to maintain his composure while simultaneously trying to keep Eliza within arm's reach. But we had anticipated this. My job was to create legitimate social obligations that separated them, introducing my sister to influential people who could become clients or connections for her revived career. By the time we reached the dinner portion, James was visibly seething. Normally, he would have controlled the situation by now, taken Eliza home, isolated her, reasserted his authority. But here, surrounded by his colleagues and superiors, his hands were tied. I was seated at Stephen Harrington's table, with Eliza placed beside me thanks to some creative manipulation of the place cards. James was across the room, trapped in conversation with senior partners. "He's going to explode when we get home," Eliza whispered, her hand trembling slightly as she lifted her water glass. "That's part of the plan," I reminded her quietly. "Remember your phone." The recording app was already running in her evening bag, ready to capture his inevitable outburst. What we hadn't anticipated was James's desperation to regain control before they left the gala. As the evening was winding down, he approached our table, his smile tight. "Eliza, darling, we should be going," he said, placing a proprietary hand on her shoulder. "Actually, Stephen was just telling us about his summer home in Nantucket," I responded cheerfully. "He's invited us both for a weekend in July." "Isn't that generous?" James's fingers tightened on Eliza's shoulder, visible even through the fabric of her dress. That's very kind, but we have family commitments this summer. Perhaps another time. I don't recall any commitments in July, Eliza said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor I could detect. We discussed this, James insisted, his tone hardening. Remember? I think I would remember planning something months in advance, Eliza replied, looking him directly in the eye. I'm sure we can make it work. The muscle in James's jaw twitched. A word, Eliza? Privately? She stood gracefully. Of course. I watched as they moved to a quiet corner, James's hand gripping her elbow too tightly. From my seat, I could see his face contorted with barely controlled anger as he spoke urgently into her ear. What he didn't know was that Stephen Harrington could also see them clearly, Stephen, whose own daughter had recently escaped an abusive marriage, and who recognized the signs immediately. Is your sister all right? Stephen asked quietly, his eyes still on the couple. No, I replied honestly. But she will be soon. When Eliza returned to the table, her face was pale but determined. James followed, his corporate mask firmly back in place. We really must be going, he announced. Early meeting tomorrow. Stephen, it was a pleasure. Actually, Eliza said clearly, I'm not ready to leave yet. Maya and I have plans to catch up. The silence that followed was electric. This kind of public defiance was unprecedented. Plans? James repeated, his voice dangerously soft. Yes, plans, I confirmed cheerfully. Sister stuff. You understand. Eliza comes home with me, he stated flatly, dropping all pretense of civility. Stephen Harrington stood slowly. Is there a problem here, James? Perhaps Eliza should decide for herself what she wants to do. Other heads were turning now. The perfect, ambitious James Elliot was making a scene, the cardinal sin in corporate politics. No problem at all, James recovered quickly. Just a misunderstanding. Of course Eliza should stay if she wants to. He leaned down, kissing her cheek while whispering something in her ear that made her stiffen. We'll talk when you get home, he said, loud enough for the table to hear, before walking away with measured steps. Are you okay? I asked once he was gone. Eliza nodded, touching her purse where her phone had recorded every word. I got it all, she whispered. Including what he just said. What was that? Her eyes met mine, resolute and clear. You'll regret this humiliation for the rest of your life, she quoted softly. I think that qualifies as a threat, don't you? The next morning, while James was at work, we executed the final phase of our plan. A moving team arrived at the house, packing Eliza's personal belongings with military efficiency. The important documents and evidence had already been secured in my office safe. By noon, there was no trace of my sister in the perfect Tudor house except for a single envelope on the dining room table. Inside was not a goodbye letter, but a legal notice informing James Elliot that he was being sued for emotional abuse, financial control, and breach of fiduciary duty in their marriage. Attached was a USB drive containing a small sample of the evidence compiled against him, along with a settlement offer that would allow him to avoid the public embarrassment of a trial. By the time James frantically called Eliza's phone, she was already sitting in my office with two partners from one of the city's most prestigious family law firms, reviewing her case. His voicemails escalated from confusion to rage to desperate bargaining. You can't do this to me, he hissed in the final message. No one will believe you. I'll make sure of it. But he underestimated us, me, my connections, and most importantly, my sister's strength once she rediscovered it. The settlement came 3 weeks later. James's attorneys had reviewed the evidence and advised him that a trial would devastate not only his reputation but his career. In exchange for a confidentiality agreement, Eliza received a substantial financial settlement, the house, which she promptly sold, and a formal apology that we framed and hung in her new apartment. Our parents were stunned. They had bought into James's perfect facade so completely that the truth left them reeling. We had no idea, my mother kept saying, tears streaming down her face. He seemed so perfect. That was the problem, I told her gently. No one questioned the perfection. 1 year later, I'm sitting on the balcony of my new condo, watching the Chicago skyline shimmer in the summer heat. My practice has grown to 15 attorneys, specializing in cases that help people reclaim their power, intellectual property, domestic abuse, financial fraud. Eliza's design business is thriving. She's rented an office 2 floors below mine, her creative energy fully reignited. The dark circles under her eyes are long gone, replaced by the confidence and spark that James had systematically extinguished. James Elliott, I hear, was passed over for partner and eventually left the firm under a cloud of rumors. Apparently, Stephen Harrington had seen enough that night to raise concerns about James's character, concerns that found fertile ground once people started paying attention. The last I heard, he had relocated to a smaller firm in a different city, his meteoric rise permanently stalled. My phone buzzes with a text from Eliza, dinner tonight? I'm bringing someone I want you to meet. I smile, typing back, as long as he knows who's really in charge of this family. Her response is immediate, she. And trust me, she already knows. I laugh out loud, the sound carrying across the balcony into the open air of a life reclaimed, redefined, and unapologetically our own. Some people will never understand that true strength isn't about control, it's about letting go of the need to control others while firmly maintaining the boundaries that protect your worth. My sister learned that lesson the hard way. I made sure the man who taught it to her learned an even harder one: no one dictates our worth but us.